All right, buckle up. We're diving into LGBTQ plus rights in South Africa. And let me tell you, the path from criminalization to one of the world's most progressive constitutions, it's a wild ride.
It really is, full of twists and turns you wouldn't expect, and we've got some awesome sources to dig into today. Legal stuff, historical analogies, even some recent public opinion polls.
Oh, polls are always fun. Because what I'm really curious about is, how do things on the ground actually match up to those big legal wins? We hear so much about South Africa being progressive, but is it really?
That's the question, right? But before we get there, let's set the stage. Historically, people just assume LGBTQ plus acceptance is this Western thing, like it came from Europe or America.
Oh, come on, it can't be that simple.
You're right, it's not. Some indigenous cultures had surprisingly nuanced views on same-sex relationships.
Nuance is good. Give me an example.
Okay, think about the boy-wives tradition among certain Bantu peoples. Young men living as wives to older men.
Whoa, so that means same-sex relationships weren't automatically taboo?
Not necessarily, no. This boy-wife thing shows there was a degree of acceptance, at least in certain situations. But, and this is important, that didn't extend to all same-sex relationships.
Got it. It's complicated.
It is, especially when we bring in British colonialism.
Oh, colonization never goes well, does it? They probably brought their own baggage.
You said it. British rules, sodomy laws, right off the bat, criminalized same-sex relationships just like that. And then under apartheid, things got even worse. More persecution, more surveillance.
Okay, so not just theory here. This actually affected people's lives, right? Scary stuff.
Absolutely real and terrifying. Take the 1966 Forest Town party raid, Johannesburg. Police raid a gathering of gay men, arrests, huge crackdown, led to this crazy 3 men at a party clause in the law.
Wait, what? 3 men at a party? What does that even mean?
Basically, it made it illegal for 3 men to be together if there was even a hint of same-sex stuff going on. You see how invasive that is.
Wow. So just existing as an LGBTQ plus person was getting harder and harder.
You got it. But even in those times, activism was starting to brew.
Pushback, right? Makes sense. People got to fight back.
Yeah, late 1970s, early LGBTQ plus groups are popping up. But here's the thing, a lot of them were divided along racial lines.
Oh man, so even within the movement, they were dealing with apartheid's mess.
Yep, we've got sources showing a difference between Gaza, mainly white, didn't really take a stand on apartheid at first. And then there's the Rand Gay organization, multiracial, anti-apartheid from the get-go.
Man, what a time. Imagine fighting for LGBTQ rights while also dealing with that system.
Tough spot to be in. Those activists were brave, no doubt. But then, bam, apartheid ends. The 90s, everything changes.
Mandela time. Did that affect LGBTQ plus rights too?
Huge impact. Mandela, in his inauguration speech, straight up include sexual orientation when he talks about equality.
Wow. A real turning point, huh?
It was, and groups like OLGA, they saw their chance. Worked hard to get those protections right into the new Constitution.
I've heard the Constitution is world famous for LGBTQ plus rights. Is that true?
100% true. 1996, South Africa becomes the first country in the world to put a ban on LGBTQ plus discrimination right in their constitution, foundationally. And it led to a ton of legal wins after that.
Okay, spill the tea. What kind of wins are we talking?
For starters, sodomy laws. Gone. Paved the way for legalizing same-sex marriage in 2006. That made them the 5th country globally to do that. Think about it, only 5.
That is fast. Seems like the law was really catching up to those big ideals. But what about people? Were their attitudes changing that fast?
That's where things get a bit tricky. On paper, South Africa's looking amazing. But the reality, a lot more complicated. It's a real head-scratcher, right? It's a progressive constitution, but people, maybe not so much. So where do we even start to figure that out?
Yeah, good question. It's is it all just for show?
Well, first, data. South Africa, they often score high on those surveys about tolerance in Africa, especially accepting homosexual neighbors. Way better than some other places, that's for sure.
Okay, so points for that. But I'm still feeling that on-paper vibe you mentioned earlier.
Rightfully so. There's this study, and the title alone is telling, Progressive Prudes. Get that? Progressive but prudes. It's this weird contradiction in South Africa. People say they support LGBTQ plus rights, but
when it comes to actually living with it, being around it, different story.
You got it. Especially when you get outside the big cities, smaller towns, rural areas, those traditional views on sexuality and gender, they hold on tight.
Makes sense. Big city, everyone's doing their own thing. You kind of have to be open-minded. So this tension, is it always bubbling under the surface?
You could say that, and our sources, they back this up. Ipsos, the polling folks, they found some interesting stuff. Way more South Africans say they're okay with legal recognition for same-sex couples than actually support full-on marriage equality.
Ah, so it's like equal rights, sure, but don't get married, please?
Kinda, yeah. Shows you that gap between what's legal and how people really feel. And that creates problems, right?
Oh, for sure. Like, having rights on paper doesn't magically make you safe or equal in daily life, does it?
Nope. And this is where things get tough. One of the biggest issues is homophobic violence. Still happening, even though it's against the law.
You mean like hate crimes, people targeted just because they're LGBTQ+.
Exactly that. And South Africa, sadly, has this especially awful thing called corrective rape.
Hold up, I don't know that one. What is that?
It's the idea that you can cure someone's sexual orientation by raping them. Usually it's targeted at lesbian women. Brutal and totally wrong.
Oh my God, are they doing anything to stop this? Are the police, like, taking this seriously?
There's been a lot of criticism about how the police handle these hate crimes. Activists say they're not doing enough to protect people, that they don't properly investigate when something happens.
So not a lot of trust there, huh?
Sadly, no. And here's another layer to this. Violence against LGBTQ plus folks, especially gay men, it's underreported. Like, way underreported.
Why? Wouldn't you want to report it if something that bad happened?
We've got a source on this, a study by Professor Juan Nell. He found that a lot of gay men, they don't report attacks. They're afraid of more stigma, more discrimination from the cops themselves or even their own communities.
It makes you feel so helpless, there's nowhere you turn.
It's a terrible situation, shows you how deep this fear goes, even with all these fancy laws. We haven't even talked about healthcare yet.
Right. I know South Africa's got that whole HIV crisis going on. Does that tie into this too?
Big time. South Africa's got one of the highest HIV rates in the world. That's a problem for everyone, but for LGBTQ plus folks, it's even worse.
Why is that? Is there something about the virus itself, or is it...
It's the stigma, mostly. There's the general stigma, right? Having HIV is hard enough. But for LGBTQ plus people, add homophobia and transphobia on top of that, it's a nightmare.
So they're basically getting hit from all sides. The virus itself, then their own community, maybe even healthcare workers judging them.
You get it. It means a lot of people don't get tested, don't seek treatment. It's like, you can have all the best medicine in the world, but what good is it if people are too scared to use it?
It's that whole trust thing again. And respect. Feeling like you're actually welcome in a doctor's office no matter who you are.
Spot on. And it's not just healthcare. This happens in education, jobs, housing, everywhere.
So big picture, yeah, South Africa's come a long way. Legally, but socially, still so much work to do. But hey, there's got to be some good news, right? Some hope.
Absolutely. It's not all bad news, not at all. Tons of amazing activists out there fighting hard, making real progress. A couple of things on the horizon I think you'll find interesting.
Okay, I'm ready for some good news. Hit me.
All right, how about this? The push for gender-neutral ideas. It's gaining traction, and if they pull it off, it'll be huge for trans and non-binary folks in South Africa.
Gender-neutral IDs? Break that down for me. What does that even look like?
Basically, it means you could choose a gender marker on your ID that actually reflects you. Not just male or female, but something else if that's who you are. Imagine what that would mean for legal recognition, for just feeling seen.
Yeah, like your ID actually matching your soul. That's powerful stuff.
Right, and South Africa wouldn't be the first. Kenya's got a system for intersex people to get gender-neutral IDs. But this proposal, it goes further. It's for all trans and non-binary people.
So even more inclusive than what Kenya's doing. Wow.
Exactly. It'd be a statement to the whole continent. Like, South Africa's serious about this.
Love it. What else is brewing on the good news front?
Well, there's the proposed ban on conversion therapy.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. Remind me, what's the deal with conversion therapy again? Why is it so bad?
Conversion therapy, it's any attempt to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. The idea behind it is messed up. Like, being LGBTQ plus is a disease, something to be cured.
Yeah, that's just wrong. And I bet those therapies can really mess people up.
You bet. Psychologically, physically, it's harmful on every level. Luckily, more and more people are realizing that, and countries are starting to ban it.
Good. So South Africa is joining that movement.
They are, and there's this case from our sources. It's horrifying, but it shows why this ban is so important. Back in 2015, there was this conversion therapy camp in South Africa. The owners found guilty of murder, child abuse, assault, all because of what they did to these kids.
God, that's awful. It's like a worst-case scenario, but it proves that these practices can be deadly.
Exactly. This ban is coming not a moment too soon.
It's clear that even with these good signs, this fight for LGBTQ plus equality in South Africa, it's not over. What are some of the big takeaways you want our listeners to remember?
The biggest one. South Africa shows us that legal rights, while important, they don't mean everything. You can have laws, you can have a progressive constitution, but if people's attitudes don't change.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone, right? Looks better on the surface, but
Exactly. It takes more than laws. It takes education, changing hearts and minds, creating spaces where LGBTQ plus folks feel safe and accepted.
it's that ongoing fight, isn't it? Like, you can't just check it off the list and say, okay, we're done.
Nope. It's about pushing for a better world every single day. And as you learn about LGBTQ plus rights in other places, keep South Africa in mind. Don't just look at the laws, look at how people actually live.
Dig deeper, right? See the whole picture. Because like we've seen today, things are rarely black and white.
You got it. And that's what this deep dive is all about, isn't it? Giving you the tools to think for yourself, question things, and understand that the fight for equality happens on many levels.
It's in the courts, it's in the streets, it's even in the stories we tell ourselves.
Well said. And remember, question everything. Don't take things at face value. Keep learning, keep seeking out different perspectives. You know, through all this, something's been bugging me, this whole pink rand thing.
Pink Rand. Oh yeah, that was interesting. Remind me, what was that about?
So it's the economic power of the LGBTQ plus community, right? But it gets me thinking, does that actually help with acceptance, or does it like create a whole new set of problems?
Yeah. Money talks, as they say. But is it saying the right things here?
Right. Are businesses, tourism, are they really embracing LGBTQ plus folks, or are they just like cashing in on the trend?
And then what about the folks who aren't part of that pink rand? The ones without the money, are they getting left behind?
That's a good point. And then there's visibility. Like one of our sources mentioned gay characters in South African soap operas. That's got to count for something, right? Especially in a place where some people are still pretty traditional.
Yeah, it's like you can't ignore it anymore if it's right there on your TV. But then again, we talked about how representation alone isn't enough.
100%. Gotta look at who is being represented and how. Are they showing the whole spectrum of LGBTQ plus life, or just the parts that make people comfortable?
Or the parts that make money, right? Because fake representation, that's almost worse than none at all.
Totally agree. It's about showing the real stuff, even if it's messy, even if it makes people uncomfortable.
So to sum it all up, we've got these legal changes, people's attitudes kind of shifting, money playing a role, what's shown in the media. It's complicated.
It really is. South Africa is a prime example of that. Good stuff happening, bad stuff too. Hard to pin it down.
Yeah, change never goes in a straight line, does it? Lots of twists and turns, unexpected detours.
And that's what I hope people get from this. South Africa's story isn't finished, and this fight for equality, it needs everyone to stay involved.
It's not like you can just sit back and relax, think it's all good now. Got to keep pushing.
For sure. And as you learn about other places, other LGBTQ plus struggles, think about South Africa, what we talked about today. Look past the laws, see how people are actually living.
Get the full picture, right? All the good and the bad.
You got it. That's what we're all about here, right? Giving you the knowledge, the tools to think critically. Don't just accept things blindly, question them.
Exactly. So to everyone listening, thanks for coming along with this deep dive with us. LGBTQ plus rights in South Africa. It's a journey, a process. Lots of ups and downs. Hopefully you've learned something, gotten some food for thought.
It's been a pleasure exploring all this with you.
Likewise. And thanks to all our listeners for joining us. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.